Welcome to our JavaScript web course. In this video, you will learn how to use some of the basic features of the document object model. Up to this point, we have been using document.write to display content in the web page. While that works, it is not the most useful approach. Supposing we wanted to change some existing content, or supposing we wanted to display a message only when something was wrong. Document.write would not work for us. Therefore, we need to have a better approach, and that approach is found in using the methods and properties of what is known as the document object model, or DOM. If you remember from your CSS classes, you may have learned about pseudo-classes. Well, pseudo-classes are essentially based on the document object model. So the document object model is a hierarchical structure of the elements in the page and also the attributes and values. So it gives us many methods in which we can access the objects. A very common method is getElementById. And that takes advantage of the value of the ID attribute placed inside an HTML element. So here we have the syntax. Document.getElementById, and in parentheses is the value of the ID, and you see that I am using that ID in this document. That expression right there makes an object reference to that element, in this case the H2 element. We can change the content inside that H2 element by accessing the inner HTML property. So we have what is called dot syntax. We have object.method.property, and now we assign a value to it. In our case, we're assigning it the string hello world. Because this is the inner HTML property, you can also add HTML elements inside those quotations. But you don't have to. Regardless, developers tend to use inner HTML to change content, rather than inner text, which only adds text, not HTML. So when the page loads, JavaScript reads from the top down. And as you can see inside my script block, I have the statement document.getElementById.innerHTML equals hello world. JavaScript has not yet read the body section. It has no idea of where or what ID equals demo is at this point. Therefore, this script is not going to run. So I'm just pointing this out. This is an issue we have when using the document object model. It references what is in the page. And if the code is in the head section, which it typically can be, then how do we work with that? The easiest solution is to place your script tags at the end of the document, right on top of the closing body tag. In that way, the whole page has been read and the whole document object has been loaded, and JavaScript knows where everything is. The second way, which is done often, and you may see this in books and on people's web pages, is to place the code inside a function that is called after the page loads. This is an anonymous function, and it is being called by the onLoad event of the window object. So here we have an anonymous function structure, window.onLoad equals function, and in between those curly braces, we have statements that would reference something in the document. This statement would not be executed until the page had loaded. Therefore, JavaScript would know where everything is in the document. Whichever method you choose to use is fine with me. So the inner HTML property indicates the value of the content that will be placed in that HTML element. Note that it replaces what is there. It doesn't add it to it, it replaces it. So if I were to load this in the browser, the statement would execute as soon as the page has been loaded, and here we see Hello World. Using document.getElementById is a lot to write, and you may need to use that object reference several times in your document. The easy way to work with this is to store that object reference in a variable. And here I am using the let keyword to declare the variable, the demo. Because I am referencing the H2 element ID equals demo, if I were to use the alert, you would see indeed that this expression does return an object. So here when I load the page, it tells me object HTML heading element. Because we have stored the object reference in a variable, now to access the inner HTML property, all we need to use is the variable name, the demo, .inner HTML, and assign a value to it, such as hello world here. Using a variable makes it easier to work with. What we have just seen could have easily been accomplished using document.write. So what is the value in using getElementById and inner HTML? JavaScript is used for user actions. So when the user does something on a page, we can call a function that will accomplish some task. The most common user action is a click. So here I have a paragraph and I have an ID. The ID value is click. And the paragraph says click to show hello world. So when I click on this phrase here on the paragraph, I am going to call a function. So we're working with a click event. So JavaScript has to know what was clicked on. Therefore, we use document.getElementById to identify the object that was clicked on. Here in our code, we are storing that object reference in a variable called the click. So now we will call an onClick event handler for this object. So I have the click.onClick. OnClick is a reserved phrase in JavaScript that refers to the click event. So when that object receives a click, we can call a function. This is what you are looking at right here. You are looking at a function call. This is not a simple function call when the page loads. This is a function call in response to a user event, which is a click on a specific object in the page. Hello world is the name of the function. This function is defined in the head section. Why is it in the head section? Because we don't need it in the body. You do not want to clutter up the body with unneeded JavaScript code. Functions are not executed until they're called. This function cannot be called until the page loads because the user has to click on something in the page. Therefore, the function is placed in the head section. Notice when we define the function, we define it with the parentheses after the function name. When we call the function, we do not use those parentheses. Should you use those parentheses, that function would be called automatically. So please note the correct syntax. The code to be executed in this function is the same code that we have been looking at, the code that will replace the existing text in H2 ID equals demo with hello world. The only difference is we are now storing it in a function, and that function is being called when we click on this paragraph. So when the user does something on the web page, you will always or almost always be calling a function in response to the event that happened to that object. So getting back to the function call, I specifically said that you cannot use the parentheses next to the function name or it will be called automatically. So how do we pass parameters to this function? So here's my function, which is the same as in the previous example, except that we are accepting one parameter, str. We are clicking on the P element, so we have our function call in our script block at the end of the document. We make the object reference to the paragraph ID equals click by storing it in a variable. We are using an anonymous function with the onClick event handler. Inside that anonymous function, we have the function call and we have the argument being passed to that function. So this is the only way to do that. I'm just showing you how it works. You need to call an anonymous function and place the function call with the argument inside that anonymous function when you're working with a click event and calling a function that accepts parameters. So here we see the paragraph click to show the hello world, and when I click, this will be replaced. So I click and we see hello world.